Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ansgar, and for the next 20 or so minutes, we are going to dive headfirst into the wild, woolly, out-of-this-world world of Saturn. What is Saturn? Where is it? How is it built? How is it designed? And most importantly, where is it going? Saturn, like every great product, begins with a problem. Saturn's problem is, where is Web3 YouTube? YouTube, what is YouTube? It's an enormous pile of hardware and software, all tailored, designed, architected, and scaled to do one thing: to deliver bytes from them to you, to bring video from them to you. And the problem with Web3 right now is we cannot build a Web3 version of YouTube. The infrastructure required that runs YouTube does not exist in Web3. And chiefly, I keep slapping this thing, I'm just so excited, chiefly amongst that infrastructure that's missing and omitted is delivery. That key aspect of YouTube of delivering bytes from them to you. That is what beget Saturn. Saturn is a decentralized, crypto-incentivized content delivery network. And we are going to tease that apart into the three different pieces. Let's start with the last one first. CDN, Content Delivery Network. What in the world is a content delivery network? The best way I can describe a content delivery network is pretend you're Amazon and you're delivering packages and parcels to the smiling denizens of the world. The way you build your logistics infrastructure at Amazon is you have a few enormous warehouses around the world. And these warehouses store all the goods that Amazon sells. But the problem is, if you don't live near one of these enormous Amazon warehouses, it becomes expensive and slow, often prohibitively, to order something from these warehouses. So what Amazon does, they have these enormous warehouses, but they have many smaller warehouses all around the world. And when you order your goods, you order your diapers or whatever else you may order from Amazon, your IPFS corgis, whatever else you order from Amazon, your order actually gets fulfilled by a much smaller warehouse, much more proximate and much closer to you. And it's that network of smaller warehouses that store a smaller amount of content but can deliver it to you much faster, much cheaper. That's what a content delivery network is on the internet. The giant warehouses, in the YouTube example, are where YouTube stores all the videos. When you upload a video, it's stored in a giant Google data center. But when you watch a video on YouTube, it doesn't come from one of those enormous data centers. It comes from a smaller data center and a smaller cache, faster and closer to you. So that is what a content delivery network is. It's a world-scale network of machines in small little clusters pushed as close to the edge, as close to the end users as possible. So that's what Saturn is fundamentally from a technical architecture. Decentralized. What does it mean that Saturn is a decentralized network? What this means for Saturn is trustless. Anyone can run a node, anyone can participate, and you don't need to trust the people running the software. It's verifiable, and that all content that you receive from the content delivery network can be verified locally. Again, this is the key piece that unlocks the trustless aspect. And the other key piece is that it's software. It is open source. Anyone can contribute, anyone can download, anyone can use it, and anyone can modify. There's no central authority. There's no central control. And now the last piece, crypto incentivized. This is the magical thread that weaves it all together. If you want someone to do something, incent them to do it. And Saturn is no different. To achieve a world-scale content delivery network with a team of 9 people, you need to incent others around the world to act and help the network grow and scale. And so all nodes and all participants in Saturn's network are incentivized to participate in good ways. And so far, if you run a Saturn node and you cache content and distribute content, you are incentivized and rewarded for doing a good job. In this case, you are remunerated for your contributions to the network in Filecoin. In layman's terms, you make money, you make bank. And so you're incentivized to help be a participant in the network. Now, what does Saturn actually look like? We've talked about at a high level what it is. What does the architecture look like? Show me the money, baby. So what we see over here is on the far left side, We see an application, and this could be an application in a web browser, this could be a native application, this could be some application running on a server, and the key piece inside thereof is the Saturn client. So just like you need an HTTP client to interoperate with the web, in this case the browser comes with an HTTP client, you use a client also to interact with the Saturn network. And what you do is when you need to fetch a piece of content from the Saturn network, you don't send it a URL like https://google.com/cat.ping. Instead, you request a SID, a content identifier that you guys are familiar with. And that SID comes back to be a critical piece, and we'll get there in a second. And what happens when you submit a request, the Saturn client routes you to that small Amazon warehouse near you. It routes you to a Saturn node around the world as close as possible. And what this means is this is how you gain not just scale around the world, but also performance, is your requests are routed to the closest nodes near you. And we'll get to a map of what Saturn looks like in a second, and we have nodes all over the world. And what this means is the key piece of a content delivery network, it's fast. Now, what does a Saturn node look like? A Saturn node has a singular responsibility. Fill as much disk as it can with stuff to cache, like in the Amazon warehouse analogy, as many toys and Barbie dolls as you can, and serve those as rapidly as possible to all the applications that request content from it. Now, below, we can see the orchestrator or control plane. This is software that underpins the entire network and is the glue that holds it all together. This is the software that sees when nodes join the network, when they leave the network, if a node is performing poorly, to lower its weight, to send fewer requests that way, when a node becomes overloaded, to also reduce the number of requests that flow its way. And it's also the piece of software which monitors the network for anomalies, fraud, and most importantly, it kind of calculates and monitors what nodes should be earning and their rewards that they should be remunerated with. And now finally, we see on the back end, IPFS and Filecoin. And so as Hannah mentioned, and as Hannah built, the Lassie software, that's the software that runs on the Saturn node that will fetch content from IPFS and Filecoin. So you can imagine that, like a cache, if you go to an Amazon warehouse and ask it for a Barbie doll, and that Barbie doll is not in the Amazon warehouse, that request is going to go all the way to one of the enormous data centers or enormous warehouses that has that. Our enormous warehouse and data center is IPFS and Filecoin. That's the bedrock of Saturn. So cache misses will flow out of a Saturn node into IPFS and Filecoin. So now let's dive into each of these components individually and get a better understanding of their roles, responsibilities in the Saturn network. So let's start with the application first. So one of the key facets of the Saturn client that runs inside of an application is what we call smart node selection. So Saturn is a large and growing network of nodes, over 2,200 of them as we speak today, as I speak now, around the world. And a key piece of this, and what gives Saturn its speed, is when a piece of content needs to be requested, you're routed to one of the nearest Saturn L1 nodes. And that way it can deliver the content you requested to you as quickly as possible. Another quintessential piece of the Saturn client is that it verifies content. And this is a key. This is a fundamental requisite key of how Saturn is built. Why? Because anyone can run a Saturn node, they could do whatever the hell they want in terms of delivering content to you. They could deliver the wrong content to you. They could do that either through malice or accident. So let's go through an example. Let's say you're building a website for your favorite puppies, like Sadie, is what we? Sadie, yeah, like Sadie. You're building a favorite website with pictures of Sadie, and you're using Saturn to do it, and someone comes to your website and they want to load a picture of Sadie. You send a request or a SID for a piece of content of Sadie, and it lands at the nearest L1 node. But that L1 node, either through malice or accident, could send you back a picture of a cat or a dog or some other dog that's not Sadie or anything else. How does the client know whether it received the content it requested or not? This is content verification. The client has the SID, and the content it receives back from the L1 is not the actual file, it's not the image, it's a CAR file, which is the file broken into lots of pieces along with a Merkle DAG of the hashes of all those pieces. And lo and behold, the SID that it originally requested is the root of that Merkle DAG. And so the Saturn Smart Client can incrementally verify bytes of that file as it's streamed back from the Saturn node. And insofar, it doesn't have to trust the Saturn node. So the content verification is a key piece. Also, of course, just like any robust client, the Saturn client provides retrying, error verification, and all manner of things that you need to provide in a client for a robust network. And the last piece here is that the Saturn client also reports on L1 nodes. Every Saturn client is a set of eyeballs in the network that monitors the rest of the network, especially the network around it. And so let's say you're a Saturn client and you try and fetch a piece of content, you try and load a picture of Sadie, and you get back something else. Verification fails. But you should report that to the network because other nodes are likely going to be requesting content from the same Saturn L1. And so Saturn clients are the eyes of the network. They are all seeing eye and they see what happens in the behavior of all nodes and report that back to the orchestrator. Now, let's go one level up. Again, the Saturn nodes' primary responsibility is to cache content and serve content. These are the warehouses of the Saturn network. And again, what they serve is not flat files, as it's known, like it's not just the image file. They're these specialized car files. And the reason we use these car files is for verification. So clients can verify content as they receive it. And that's the piece that lets Saturn be a trustless network. Clients can verify, and Saturn nodes can send car files. Now, as we also mentioned in the prior diagram and architecture, Saturn nodes will cache miss to IPFS and Filecoin. So what does this mean? That all the content that you, as a user, and through your Saturn client, would fetch from an L1 node, if it's available on IPFS or Filecoin, it can be served already, right now, by a Saturn node. And one other interesting key aspect of a Saturn node is every Saturn node has a weight. And what that weight is determined by a bunch of performance metrics, a blend of performance metrics. So there's metrics like TTFB, time to first byte, the total upload speed, the number of errors, the number of verifications that have failed. And all these metrics are put in a little cauldron and stirred and bubbling. And what comes out of that is a weight. And this is what you want to optimize if you're a Saturn client. The better your performance, again, we're talking about crypto incentivizations here, the better your performance, the larger your weight, the more requests you receive, and the more you earn. And if you're a bad node, the opposite happens. You receive a lower weight, you receive fewer requests, and you earn less Filecoin. And in this way, every node is incentivized to provide more faster to the network, and the crypto incentive cycle is completed. The last piece here is metrics. Just like Saturn clients report on what they see in the network, Saturn nodes also report what they see. They report the requests they send, they report metrics on their health, the amount of disks they have, et cetera. And all those metrics are reported, both go into the soup that kind of calculates their weights as they're corroborated by nodes from Saturn clients, but also go into how many rewards they should be given. Now, the last piece here is the brain of the network. I like to think of this, if any of you guys are familiar with X-Men or have seen any X-Men movies, you have Professor Xavier and he puts on a Cerebro helmet and can see all minds in the world. This, the control plane, the orchestrator, that's Cerebro. And it sees all nodes in the network and monitors all nodes in the network. And when a node joins the network, it's what welcomes it with a red carpet rollout. And when a node leaves the network, it's what pats it on the butt out the door. You know, it manages the network. And one of its key responsibilities, as we talked about, every node has a weight. It's the control plane that sets weights of every node, so it rewards good behavior and disincentivizes bad behavior. It's in charge of routing, is how does a node get routed to? And it's also in charge of issuing and managing TLS certificates. And why are certificates important? Because they're a fundamental underpinning of how the web works. When your browser tries to load content from a secure web page, it's not going to let content be loaded from an insecure web service. So certificates are a key piece here, and the orchestrator is what manages that. Another key responsibility is it calculates rewards for Saturn nodes. So again, rewards fundamentally break down into how much content to deliver and what was the performance of that content. And the orchestrator sees all this, monitors all this, and calculates the rewards. Another key piece the orchestrator does is it detects anomalies and fraud. There is no proof of bandwidth exchange. There's no way to really stop two nodes from colluding and exchanging content in kind of an infinite loop to say like, oh, hey, this node sent me 400 exabytes of data. Please pay me in turn for 400 exabytes of data. So what the orchestrator does is it takes a look for and tries to find anomalous behavior and fraud and stamp that out. And the last piece that I do want to mention here is that the orchestrator right now is that we are engineers shipping on a deadline and trying to solve problems, this Web3 YouTube problem, as rapidly as possible. As the orchestrator now is partly centralized, it's being iteratively decentralized over time. That eventually all this will be decentralized with smart contracts and you'll be able to interact with and interoperate with all the control plane and the orchestration all via smart contract, but we're not there yet. Now, you mix all of these together and you get something explosively magical. This is by far, unequivocally, my favorite slide of the whole deck. And let's walk through why. There might be some name brands you recognize up top, Cloudflare, maybe a few people have heard of that here. What this is time for these networks, Cloudflare, Fastly, and Saturn, to reach 25 terabits per second of capacity, of total capacity of the network. And if you look all the way over on the left side, you'll see Cloudflare. What this means, it took Cloudflare 10 years from their inception to build a network with 25 terabits per second of capacity. Next over, Cloudflare's brother, is Fastly. It took Fastly 7 years to build a network with 25 terabits per second of capacity. And last but not least, our plucky little underdog that is ascendant beyond is Saturn. It took Saturn one, pardon my French, fucking year to reach the same capacity that it took Fastly and Cloudflare 7 and 10 years respectively. This is the gasoline that Saturn is cooking with. This is what decentralization, this is what crypto incentives unlocks. And we're just getting started. This is a picture of what this growth looks like. So this is a screenshot I took of what's known as the Saturn Explorer. You can check it out at explorer.saturn.tech. It is a giant blow-up 3D globe, and you can spin it around and take a look at every Saturn node on the planet. And you can dive into every Saturn node. You can click, 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 and see the Filecoin earnings per Saturn node, the time to first byte, the amount of data they've sent. You can see it all. It's a public network. And what we're looking at here is a picture, of course, of Europe. And every little blip you see here is a small cluster of nodes. So imagine that one of those little Amazon warehouses that I've now alluded to a few times. And the number inside of that little blip, is the number of nodes in that cluster. And if we walked back a year ago, literally 1 year ago, Saturn launched 21st of November 2022, not even a year ago. This would be a completely barren wasteland of Europe. Nothing, not a peep, nothing. And now you can see we have nodes all over Europe and growing. This is what happens when you unlock decentralization and crypto incentives. Now, how can you get involved? Where's the network now and you want to jump in? One of the ways you can jump in is you can run a node. And so over here we see various tools we've written, like you can see your earnings here, your bandwidth served, the number of retrievals. We have a real-time dashboard where you can see all the nodes in the network and all their statistics. Again, it's a totally open network. And what does it mean to run a node? What it means is you have a server, you install Saturn software, which is all open source. You can go take a look at it all on GitHub. And you essentially offer your disk and you offer your bandwidth pipe to the Saturn network, and content starts being cached. You start receiving requests, and you contribute and serve requests to end users, and you earn Filecoin in return. And how is it built? How do you actually run it? It's just a Docker container. You put your Docker container in your server and done. That's it. And the requirements to get involved are a 10 gigabit a second upload link and a 4 terabyte SSD. That's it. You can spin up a server, or if you have a server available that meets these requirements, I encourage you to run a Saturn node and put your blip on the map. Now, there's one other key piece that I'm also really excited about, and this is forthcoming, hot off the presses. Saturn will soon, in the next 2 weeks, be launching a private beta for websites. What does that mean? If you run a website that loads content address content, if any assets in your website are loaded via SID, this beta is for you. And what it means is you'll be able to, in 2 weeks, participate and join, and you'll get a little browser client that runs in your website. And what it does is it detects requests made by your website for content address content, and it shoots them to Saturn and loads them faster and cheaper from Saturn. And so this is launching in 2 weeks, and if you have any interest in participating, again, if you have a website and want to load content address content from IPFS or Filecoin, please come talk to me. I'm not hard to find, I'm loud, I'm excited, I'm always rearing to go. Come talk to me, I'd love to talk with you. And now, where's Saturn going? Now, we've talked about its past, how it's designed, how the problem it began to solve, and where's it going? Well, 1 year ago, November 21st, 2022, in Lisbon, Portugal, we launched. And now we're coming up on the customer launch for websites that I just mentioned in 2 weeks. And next up is edge storage. So there are other people who don't just want to distribute content, but also want to store content at the edge. And Saturn nodes will, in the future, be able to store, kind of like an IPFS parlance, you'll be able to pin content on the edge somewhere. So not just cache it, but store it in a permanent manner. And then, of course, we're always and iteratively walking towards full decentralization. Like I mentioned before, the orchestration and control plane is partly centralized, partly decentralized. And we're waiting on a bunch of great tools to come out of the ecosystem. Like IPC will be a fundamental linchpin of a lot of Saturn's decentralization, and that's also under active development. Now, I want to point out one other thing. Why, Ansgar, are all these things plotted on an exponential curve? I want to go back to the key underpinnings of Saturn and how we've grown from 0 to hero in under a year. The fascinating aspect about Saturn, and this is why Saturn's going to win, with asymmetric warfare. When we don't control all the architecture and the infrastructure, and all of our software is open source, every time Saturn engineers all go to sleep, the network grows. People are still adding nodes, people are still adding capacity, people are still optimizing the network's getting faster, the network's growing and it's getting larger, all while we sleep. And we've seen this. If you look back at our growth, again, juxtaposed with the growth of Fastly and Cloudflare, we are out of the gate like a rocket ship because we don't need to grow like a Cloudflare and Fastly. Cloudflare and Fastly grow by getting a bunch of suits in a boardroom, getting out a checkbook and saying, where should we go build the next data center? Where should we go put a bunch of capacity? We don't do that. Saturn doesn't operate like that. It's asymmetric warfare. Anyone around the world, without my permission or anyone's permission, could go spin up a node and start contributing capacity. And that is the key difference that unlocks Saturn's growth. Now, I'd love to answer any questions you guys may have about Saturn, about its architecture, about where we started and where we're going. And to spice things up a bit, unfortunately, there aren't any Saturn candy bars available yet. So I've got the next best thing, Mars candy bars. So if you ask a question, and I would love for you to ask a question, please ask a question. There is a Mars bar with your name on it. Thanks, guys. Yeah, please.
So are there any plans to build like a managed HTTP gateway in front of this, or is the expectation I use the client and do that myself?
Great question. So we absolutely will have managed HTTP endpoints that if you want to trust us instead of kind of running your own client, where those managed gateways will do the verification and then send you the post-verified content after. So absolutely there'll be ways to interact with the Saturn network where essentially instead of verifying locally, you can verify remotely, if you will. Nice. Is that your question? Answer your question? Yeah, great question. Great question. Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit, because I know like one of the biggest challenges in an open decentralized system like this is always, particularly an incentivized one, is always like abuse and fraud, right? So can you talk a little bit about how you think about that and how you imagine being able to scale that up at the same kind of exponential growth that you're seeing on the network?
That is a great damn question. Here's how I think about it. And there are many ways to think about it, but here's how I think about it. Anytime you go to a website without ad block, you see ads. And the way that advertisement networks work is they can't stop click fraud. There's nothing they can do to stop you loading your own website and just clicking on your own ads, right? And this is an unsolved problem. Again, there's no way to stop that. However, a lot of people have spent a lot of time, especially at Google and other ad networks, building anti-fraud and click fraud mechanisms and algorithms to detect this and fend against it and control it. And so some percent of all ad clicks and all ad views online are fraudulent, right? But that has not prevented ads from being the business model that powers the entire internet. In other words, it is in a controllable and not, I'd say, death stroke level, if you will. And that's the same way that I view Saturn and the Saturn network. Insofar, there's nothing we can do to prove every retrieval was kind of not collusion or not fraud. Like there is no proof of bandwidth retrieval. There's nothing that fundamentally we can do to stop someone spinning up a Saturn client requesting from their own server and saying like, hey, please now pay me, right? They own both parties. So what we do for now, and we'll get to where we're going in the future in a second, what we do for now is the same thing that the ad networks do, which is we write a bunch of software and we do our best to detect and prevent and punish and disincentivize this. And so far, so good. You know, and we've seen this. We've seen people like commit fraud on the network and be penalized, and it's a cat and mouse game back and forth. But we don't think it's an insurmountable problem in the same way it was not an insurmountable problem with ad networks. Now, one key piece here. Why did we kind of get in this game to begin with? we would love if clients had their own wallet and actually had to pay for retrievals. Because if an end client, he had a little wallet, and every time it fetched content from Saturn, it actually had to pay for that fetch, you get around all this kind of fraud detection. You don't have to detect that anymore because clients have to pay their way. Why didn't we build Saturn like this? We didn't build Saturn like this where clients have to pay because that's just not how the internet is built now. Like when you go and try and access a website, you don't have to put a bunch of pennies in your browser to go load google.com and to go load other websites. Now, with Web3 and the advent and growth thereof, we hope that eventually the web might arrive at a model like this in the future, where when you go to a website, you have to pay your way. And again, it's not $100 to go to google.com, it's 1,000th of a penny. But the point is you are directly exchanging value with Google, who sends you a return of the website. And in that world, a lot of this fraud and anomaly detection goes away because clients have to pay their way. So that's the world we want to go. We want to get ourselves out of having to do this anomaly detection and fraud detection and kind of having the orchestrator and the network itself police itself, right? But we're just not quite there yet. To really nail that requires a fundamental shift in oncoming kind of Web3 where clients become actors in the network and have a wallet associated with them. So anyway, I hope I was able to answer your astute, sage question about anti-fraud and anti-fraud detection and how we think about it now, how I personally think about it now, and then where we'd like to go in the future to dodge that entirely. Does that answer your question? Yep. Great question. Great question. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.